Welcome to the top of your game.
On Tonight with Vincent Brown, the symphysiotomy draft report is criticised by survivors who dismiss it as an elaborate apology for an abomination. Tonight we ask, is the government dragging its heels on this issue, and discuss the role of the Catholic Church in all this. That's Tonight with Vincent Brown at 11 on 3.
It's been a busy week for independent TD Mick Wallace, whose tax affairs have dominated the headlines. In a moment, I'll be joined by Noreen Hegarty of independent.ie and tax expert Mark McCutcheon to discuss the issue. But first, this report from Claire McKenna.
For the last week, independent TD Mick Wallace has found himself in the eye of a media storm. Details of his tax affairs broke last Thursday when the Irish Times reported he had made a settlement with the Revenue Commissioners. The settlement arose following an underpayment of VAT. The construction company of Mick Wallace, M&J Wallace, failed to make full tax returns on apartment sales over a 2-year period. The figure underpaid amounted to €1.4 million. And this, added to the penalties accrued by the Revenue Commissioners, brought about the settlement figure of €2.1 million. This information was due to be published on the Revenue's list of tax defaulters. Speaking on radio, the Wexford TD said it was unlikely the money would be paid back, as his company is insolvent.
Bar some bank were to come in and rescue the company, which is very unlikely in this climate. It's very unlikely that the Revenue will get the money. I was trying to save the company. I had 60 people working for me as well. I was trying to save their jobs. I was dealing with 4 banks that were putting incredible pressure on me. In hindsight, it would have been better if I had just let the company go at the time.
Back in May of last year, M&J Wallace went into receivership, and the following October, the Commercial Court ordered Wallace to repay the loans of over €19 million owed to ACC Bank. On Friday, the Irish Independent reported that company records for the year-end 2008 showed M&J Wallace paid the TD and his son, the only directors, €290,000. The same year, it made a €2.6 million loss. Their pay had almost doubled from the previous year. On Monday of this week, Wallace bowed to pressure from his fellow colleagues and stepped down from the Independent's technical group.
I talked to him directly face to face, and I made it very clear, and he listened to what I had to say. He came back and he said that he was going to voluntarily step aside from the technical group.
Party whips postponed a motion of censure against the TD yesterday, awaiting a meeting of the Dáil Committee on Members' Interests. Earlier today, Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin questioned why the issue could not be debated by the House. And after an acerbic exchange with the Ceann Comhairle, the Dáil was suspended. The pressure is mounting, and with an official investigation by an Oireachtas committee and the DPP being mooted, can the TD, who built his campaign as a man of the people, now weather the storm that surrounds him? Speaking to TV3's Ursula Halligan, he remained firm.
Have you considered resigning?
No, I haven't, no.
Why not?
Because I don't think I should.
But where is your credibility?
Well, the people will decide that. Not the media.
I'm joined now by editor of independent.ie Noreen Hegarty and tax advisor Mark McCutcheon. Noreen, where do you think this story is going to go now that the issue is now being dealt with by a Dáil committee?
Well, I think it looks likely that Mick Wallace may get the opportunity to address the Dáil, and that's what he's been seeking. I think that he's in a very difficult position personally, in that he made a stance, a moral stance, if you like, in terms that he was going to represent the people of Wexford against the bureaucracy of government, against the perceived corruption of the past, as a voice for the honest man and as an honest voice. And his credibility has been undermined by the revelations. I think he thought that the story would be done and dusted within a very short period of time. He came out, he confessed, he gave interviews about it, and he said that he had come to a settlement with the Revenue Commissioners and he didn't have a personal liability. But he does have a moral liability, and that's where his difficulty lies. So when he talks about the media hounding him and the people will decide, the Wexford People today has a pink front cover, and it's saying, you know, call for a by-election, resign, and then let the people decide. And I think that's where his difficulty is. For example, he fought very hard against the axing of the special needs assistance in Wexford, and it was pointed out today that the 2.1 million to the revenue, and I know it's a simplistic equation, but the 2.1 million that essentially his company owes, and he's the director of the company, not personally liable, I accept, but that would pay the axed special needs assistance in Wexford for the next 7 years. That's the kind of question he's going to have to deal with.
Do you get any sense, because he personally is quite a popular character around Leinster House, that there is much sympathy there for him? I mean, we haven't heard it voiced very much, but do you think there's sympathy there for him?
I think there's sympathy in Dáil Éireann, and I think there's sympathy from people in general. He's a very likeable individual, and I wouldn't underestimate the power of that likeability. He's very charming, and he's been pretty straight, and he was seen as a new independent going into the Dáil, and there was some hope that this was a different voice.
Is it a bit of a case of that when you get up onto the high moral ground, the fall is very long if you do something wrong?
Well, I think different standards are expected of people in business. There is an expectation that they will make a profit and do what they have to do to achieve that. When you're in the Dáil and you're a public servant, there's a very different standard of behaviour required. And Mick Wallace came in as somebody who was representing a new dawn in Irish politics. And it appears that it's very like, you know, the old way of doing things.
Yeah. Mark, could I turn to you and just ask you, I mean, a lot of people don't really understand how somebody could reach a point where they owe 2.1 million. So could you just tell us exactly how this VAT is paid and how it could have been allowed to build up to such an amount?
Well, with Mick Wallace's case, the construction sector is quite a peculiar sector when it comes to how businesses deal with their VAT liabilities, because of the complex nature of VAT and property. Some businesses would be required to pay and manage their VAT based on when they receive cash. Other construction companies might be required to determine their VAT based on when they sign their contracts. And obviously then there's the issue of completion of those contracts and receipt of the cash itself to finance the VAT liabilities. And some customers may have run into a bit of difficulty, for example, which would have put the construction company in a spot of bother meeting its VAT liabilities. So there's a whole range of factors really which could affect
I mean,
them.
isn't one of Mick Wallace's most serious problems is that he actually reported that he owed a certain amount of VAT, which was half of what he actually owed? Well, is that common to happen?
I don't think it is common, to be honest with you. I think a lot of business people would be honest in their dealings with the revenue commissioners. And when it comes to this type of situation, it's common in the last couple of years that a lot of businesses would have cash flow difficulties, for example, and it would be advisable for those businesses to file their tax returns correctly and make the revenue commissioners aware of their cash flow difficulties.
Try and do a deal with them.
So that the revenue could give them a sympathetic ear, shall we say.
And are you somewhat surprised that a case like this, I mean, we happen to be talking about this case, that a case with these ingredients in it, that this person hasn't ended up being prosecuted rather than reaching a settlement?
Well, I am surprised and I'm not surprised. It's a bit difficult to give a definitive opinion on this, because at the end of the day we don't really know all the specific facts and circumstances around it. He gave a voluntary disclosure. Now, it has emerged today that he did it at a time where he was in receipt of an audit notification. So,
in other words, he felt he might be caught anyway.
Well, there is a risk that he could be subject to prosecution, but at the same time, we don't know all the specific facts or circumstances. We are aware that he entered into a phased payment arrangement, for example, and the circumstances where revenue might decide to withdraw the benefits of the voluntary disclosure.
And would the revenue people still have the option to take a prosecution case against Mick Wallace, or is printing his name in the paper the kind of end of the game and then they just have to try and look for the money?
Well, the option is there, would be there, depending on the specific facts of his particular case, how the liability arose, what actually went on the ground, shall we say.
I see. So just one other kind of question that I think puzzles people, this issue of, well, I'm not liable because it's a limited company and I'm a personal person in my own right. Just, I mean, is there ever a time where that crosses over?
Well, there have been cases decided by the courts in the last couple of years which have imposed personal liability on directors in similar cases where fiduciary taxes, as they're called, VAT and PAYE, are used as a means of managing cash flow difficulties. So there is a significant risk that directors in these types of situations could be held personally liable.
So that could also be hanging over Mick Wallace in this case.
And not only that then, but there is the risk that they could be disqualified from acting as a director into the future. And that's obviously going to be of significant concern to business people who may want to start up again, let's say, if a business fails for genuine reasons.
And then they mightn't be allowed to be a director again.
Yeah.
Noreen, just finally, could I ask you, you know, if Mick Wallace decided himself or felt he was pushed so hard, what would be the play out the scene then after that? Would there be a by-election? Could he stand again, or would he stand again? All those kind of issues.
He certainly could stand again. I mean, there are a number of other political parties who would love the opportunity of a by-election in Wexford. It doesn't look likely that he's going to give them that opportunity. I suspect that what will happen is he will address the Dáil. There may be a censure on him in the Dáil. It won't have any real effect, and he'll keep the head down for a while and run for election the next time out.
But just tell me, I mean, if he addresses the Dáil, can he actually give every detail and chapter and verse? I mean, I know the revenue can't give out that information without the permission of the taxpayer, but do you think he's likely to sort of spell out everything that happened between him and the revenue if, as you say, Mark, he was subject to an audit and in fact was kind of caught, as it were?
Well, the first question that he has to answer is whether he's going to allow the revenue to communicate with the Dáil, you know, to reveal details in relation to MJ Wallace, and that hasn't become clear yet. He does have an opportunity in the Dáil to put out his case. I think there's been a lot of sensitivity this week about following procedures properly and going through due process, and we'll see tomorrow if he does get that opportunity. I have no doubt that he will make a convincing speech, and then, you know, really, Fianna Fáil seem to be at the forefront of seeking, you know, to have an example made of him, and they're not on very strong ground. You know, it's a very short time since we were listening to Bertie won the money on a horse, and people remember that. So, you know, I don't think there's much of an appetite to push this to the limit.
I think there's more to play in this story, as it were. Obviously, we have to wait and see what this Dáil committee comes up with, and then to hear the statement tomorrow, and maybe he will release the revenue commissioners, and they may then tell a little more of the detail. But I know out there are compliant taxpayers who are watching this story very closely because they're very angry about it. So thank you both very much indeed for coming in this evening. If you'd like to get in touch with us on the show, or you have a story you want to tell us, you can contact us by email on midweek@tv3.ie or on our Facebook page. Good night.